County Cannabis Working Group, September 12th. It's 5 minutes after 10, and we're going to get started now. Let's see. Today on the agenda, we're just talking about commercial cultivation broadly. And let's see, we left off talking about indoor cultivation and got into a little bit of outdoor cultivation. Our last meeting talking about manufacturing zones, agricultural zones. And we talked a little bit about timberland cultivation. Let's see. That's about it for that. If Joel wants to talk about our retail manufacturing ordinance briefly, about where we're at with that, when the board will see it. And then also we talked about questions about the tax ordinance and how it might relate to mixed light licenses or not, and how the tax applies and such. So we should talk about those things first, maybe.
Okay, starting with retail and manufacturing. That will go to the Board of Supervisors on the 25th. And technically, it doesn't need to be introduced and then adopted at a later meeting because it went to the Planning Commission. But I'm thinking that it might be wise to go ahead and do 2 board meetings to give everybody as much opportunity as possible, since the Planning Commission wasn't well attended. So probably it'll be introduced on the 25th and adopted on the second week of October.
What was the concerns that the Planning Commission had that they expressed? I couldn't make it, so I did. It's not on the YouTube yet, so I couldn't see it.
Well, you know, different people had different concerns, I guess. Well, one person wanted more information, though he said so after the vote, so we didn't really get a chance to give it to him. One person was against it because it's federally legal. One person was just against it. Never really said. No, those are the three. Those 3 people voted down. The other 2 were okay with it. So, yeah, wasn't you know. If you watched yesterday's board meeting, we got into a lot of it, and I think my feelings on that issue are fairly public at this point. So, you know, I like to just kind of move on from the Planning Commission. When we take cultivation there, they'll get enough information that whatever reason they voted down will have to be something else.
The Board of Supervisors still has the opportunity to adopt the ordinance, even with the negative declaration from the Planning Commission?
Yes, the Planning Commission makes a recommendation. The Board of Supervisors doesn't have to give it any deference. Okay.
It's just, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm a little confused as to why they would do that at this point in time versus being involved at a point in time when they could have had a little bit more say.
It was my impression that they were pretty much philosophically opposed to cannabis.
Okay. Okay.
So, you know.
Cool. I mean, that's great.
I
Thanks,
had a
Joel.
question, and maybe you could answer it, Joel. Does it happen in the past where the Planning Commission would just arbitrarily say no to some ordinance the city or the county, or I guess the county, right, would be bringing forward without saying something like, we want to see this and this changed and bring it back to us? Or has there ever been a time where they just arbitrarily said no and we don't ever want to see this again?
I don't know historically, you know, the county bringing forward an ordinance like this that comes from, I mean, nothing, this situation is pretty novel. It would be the expectation if the Planning Commission is going to recommend not approving, that there would be recommendations for changing the ordinance. I think that was expressed by the board yesterday. So, you know, we're just going to move forward, and it'll be on the board meeting, and the public can come, and I think everybody's had a lot of opportunities to have input at this point, so.
Yeah, that's good. My opinion means clearly nothing, but I feel that the Planning Commission has not done their job, because in my opinion, the Planning Commission is here to see it like this example of an ordinance, and if they don't like the way it's written, they should be saying, we don't like this about it. If you, the Board of Supervisors, are going to approve an ordinance like this, we would recommend A, B, and C. It's not my view that the Planning Commission's choice is to just arbitrarily choose yes or no to something that isn't, I mean, that's the Board of Supervisors' choice to choose yes or no. The Planning Commission is here to see something and recommend how you move forward with it. Not that you do move forward with it, just if you do, this is what we would recommend, you know. So it seems to me that the Planning Commission has not completed their task. But we can obviously don't need them to complete their task. The county doesn't need them to complete their task. So.
I agree with you 100%. I don't think that they have done their job fully. If they did not have the information that they needed to make an educated decision, one way or another, they should have tabled it until they got that information, instead of just saying no and then asking the questions after the meeting was over with. So I feel the same way, that they just did not do their job.
Yeah, because ultimately, it's not the Planning Commission's choice to say, no, you should not have cannabis in your community. In my opinion, their choice, if you're going to have cannabis in your community, then we as a group would recommend you only have one store, and it's so tiny and it's so out of the way. Like, it's so minimalistic that it's basically not even there. Like, they're basically saying yes or no to this whole shebang versus how you would move forward with it, you know.
Next issue is another layer of frustrating complexity that we now have to add, involving the structure, no structure, indoor-outdoor situation. And that is because, A, the board was pretty clear yesterday they don't want to see it out of a structure on ag land. So we're not going to do in a structure or out of a structure. It's going to basically have to be in a fully enclosed structure and call it indoor. And then in a structure that involves some sort of natural light, be outdoor. We really can't have a mixed light category because we don't have a mixed light tax. We're going to have to basically call, I think, everything that is any amount of natural light outdoor. Does that make sense to people?
Yep. Yeah, it sounds good.
Because the alternative would, like, you know, in interpreting the tax ordinance, we can't extend a tax any more than the ordinance says that the people approve. So an interpretation that kind of like split mixed light in half or something, like that try to tax half of it as, you know, the more intense light usage as indoor, I think would run afoul of the initiative process. So where it gets, I think, kind of weird in my mind is if we're going to allow it out of a structure on timberland, we're going to have to kind of have a fully enclosed in a structure that uses natural light, and a third category that is out of a structure, and that third category is not allowed on agricultural land. And
so just so I get this right, if I, you know, am capable of getting a license and I want to use a greenhouse to house the plants, but I also want to use a little bit of artificial light to supplement lighting. You know, the state dictates that there's a certain amount of wattage per square foot to be considered indoor versus a mixed light. How does that, well, I guess I just answered my own question in my head.
yeah, I mean, I guess any amount of lights you use, if you're also using natural light, would be outdoor. What we would have to do is have some sort of threshold, so you can't you know, have a skylight, let a little bit of natural light in, and then call it outdoor and use.
Well, I
primarily-
think I would come at it from the totally opposite direction than what you just said, Joel. I would look at it as, since at least in the short term, we're talking about not having a county-based mixed light license. We're just talking about strictly an outdoor license versus strictly an indoor license. And the state defines indoor as a certain wattage per square foot. Then the county would just, I would think, use wattage less than that per square foot and to zero. So like if it's whatever it is per square foot and above is indoor, that amount down is classified under an outdoor license for the county. And
That's kind of what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
I just,
2 tiers of mixed light, and before we go into that, I would sort of, and for consistency with our tax thing, I would be okay with not having a mixed light category in the county. So the problem is this, we left it off of the tax thing because it's all mixed light, really, and it shouldn't be taxed so closely to indoor. It should, you know, $1 is, I think, appropriate for mixed light. Outdoor is sort of, $1 is almost too much for conventional single season outdoor, but we didn't want to go below that. So it's sort of like the $1 was supposed to apply to mixed light, but then what happened is the state included, if you're not using any lights, but you're using light deprivation, like a tarp, then you have to get a mixed light license. And that was sort of a problem, I think. And I was hoping that we would be able to use light deprivation and still be considered outdoor, taxed at the outdoor rate, and not using high intensity lights. And there's a beginning tier of mixed light where you're up to 6 watts per square foot, which is pretty low. You're definitely not going to be, you know, sneaking in an indoor operation at that threshold. You know, so if there's some way to do it like that, where you're only allowed that first tier of mixed light, I don't know if that gets into too much complication for the county to.
So it would be, you can have basically what the state's calling indoor, and then the lower tier of mixed light, and not allowing the second tier of mixed light at all. Is that what you're?
Right, like the second tier is from 6 to 25 watts and it's more expensive from the state. It's a different license.
Would we allow it and call it indoor, or would we not allow it?
I would say allow it and call it indoor.
so you get taxed at the indoor rate even if you
Yeah.
use 6 watts or less?
Yeah, that'd be better than not allowing it, and
I think so, too.
better than, and it shouldn't be considered indoor because that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
At 25 watts per square foot, that's almost indoor.
Yeah.
Especially with more modern technology. Those wattages are kind of based on older HID technology. And so
I think that because we just say indoor and outdoor in the tax ordinance, you know, we would get pretty reasonable, pretty sustainable pushback if we called that mixed light tier indoor and taxed it that way.
Right.
So I would rather just call it
Outdoor.
outdoor, and if you think it's kind of unfair to tax it like outdoor, then to just leave a gap there and not permit anything in between.
I don't think it's unfair
That's
to
what I would
tax it at an
say.
outdoor rate.
I would say-
mean, truthfully, 6 watts per square foot is really just an extension of light. It's not really doing anything for promoting flower growth, but what it is doing is giving you an opportunity to extend your light cycles a little bit. So, you know, like if you wanted to get a harvest in from, say, February to, you know, the May timeframe, those lights are actually really helpful. Even at a 6 watt per square foot, you know, threshold there, it could really help to improve your amounts of.
It's like a
harvest
work light
yields.
threshold.
Yeah, I would have to research a little bit closer what would be a normal amount of day length extension wattage per square foot that you would use in a, let's say, a greenhouse setting. You know, that would be, and what light it would be. That would be the determining factor, because a lot of people would be trying to day length extend their plants, you know, during the winter, trying to keep them in vegetative mode and or vice versa, whatever. But that would be where those lights would mostly come into play, probably, as far as what you would really need to make the plant effective.
Or I mean, if you've got a vegetative cycle going, and in February you wanted to transfer some of those plants into a flowering space to get an early spring harvest, that 6 watts extra light a day that you could put on your plants for 12 hours a day is substantial during that time frame because of the intensity of the sun. The level of the sun is at an angle, so it's not necessarily directly over. So it does particularly help for filling out flower.
Right.
You know, that would be something where I think, you know, I'd really like to see that capability.
I think
So
at the
however we
lower
can work it.
threshold, at 0 to 6, I think it's probably reasonable to include that with outdoor at the tax rate. I think at the higher threshold, 6 to 25, it's probably not appropriate to consider that. And,
Yeah, I
and
would
maybe it's easier to just not include that. Personally, I would like to not see that anywhere. People using that intensity of light for outdoor growing, because the light goes all over the place and people do a bad job of blacking it out, especially in timberland where it's too hard to keep track of that, you know, and so I see it across the valley, the lit up greenhouses, and I don't like it.
The lit up greenhouses is something that we have to control.
Sure, but I'm saying it's not going to be controlled. It's not going to be
Yeah.
enforced, you know, especially out in the mountains. Nobody's going to go to not enough people are going to go to the effort of blacking out their operation every night out in the woods. So that's where I think maybe it'd be easier just to not include that license type.
That works for me.
Yeah, the larger threshold
The
from
larger threshold
6 to
mixed light,
25.
6 to 25, you know, because it's, I don't know.
I do have a question though. So say, you know, we get this ordinance through, it's maturing at a good rate. How hard is it to revisit, say, adding an extra tax base to that?
It has to go back to the voters.
Okay,
And
so we'd have to
so-
wait another 2-year cycle to get to that point,
Well,
just give or take.
We can send it for a special election, but it's really expensive.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
$60,000 to hold that election. So realistically, the next opportunity to have a separate mixed light tax and change these categories will be 2020.
Okay. I mean, I
Which
don't-
isn't
I
a
don't-
bad period
No,
of
it's
time
not a bad period of
to
time.
test this out.
No, not at all. Yeah, absolutely. I don't see a problem with that. I just wasn't sure how difficult it was to do that again, or, you know, because I do think at some point that would probably be something that, you know, the county would probably want to revisit, but.
When we're talking about blacking out lights, I think that's going to need to have some sort of aesthetic criteria. Is it going to be huge blue tarps on your white?
No.
You know,
No.
like what's it going to look like?
Well,
they'd be
basically,
black.
most blackout tarps are black on one side and then white reflective on the other to reflect light and heat away.
The state has a little bit of a.
The state
they
does have a little-
I don't know, I didn't look into it, but there's something about the, night sky, something. Somebody has some standards.
A
for
lot of
this.
your more higher end greenhouses,
Yeah.
it's not an external thing, it's an internal thing.
Yeah.
And so you would never see it.
And it's a lot of these are on automated systems. Some of the smaller hoop houses that people do the light deprivation during the summer, they're a little smaller so they can actually manually pull tarps over something.
But no, blue tarps don't work because
No.
it lets too much light back in.
Um,
But if you're just trying to eliminate light from leaking out, though, then somebody might use a blue tarp, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
But I don't know.
It
Hey.
will reflect this blue light.
you know, a greenhouse that kind of does it internally would definitely be the most palatable. But we're talking about existing structures, so we're kind of talking about using what exists in the community now. And we want these things to be,
Well, we're talking about existing structures in the coastal
In the
zone,
coastal
right?
zone.
But outside of the coastal zone,
Inland,
it's
yeah.
potentially new structures.
Yeah.
yeah,
Which is,
and we could make it in the ordinance that your greenhouse has to have internal light controls or something. I think, you know.
If you're under the outdoor
Mixed
license
light
Right.
and
under
using
6,
light.
Yeah,
Right,
under the
'cause-
6 watts.
Otherwise, yeah, if you're in a greenhouse using no lights, you won't have any light leakage problems, and if you're totally enclosed, you shouldn't have any light leakage problems, so.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes
I
sense.
like that.
I mean, truthfully, I wouldn't want to drive by my property on the highway and see light leaking from a greenhouse either, so I have no problem with that.
I think part of it also goes back to what are our setbacks and everything going to be. Because, you know, I hear these arbitrary comments by the Board of Supervisors, and I really think that they're not understanding what they're saying, I'm hoping, that I don't want to see outdoor. And we all know what outdoor is, that outdoor isn't necessarily seen. It's not necessarily outdoor. It has to do with the definition of light and being used. And, you know,
I think
it's a big county, right? And so, you know, is 3 miles away from any public road okay? You know, there's a setback where outdoor is perfectly fine, and I'm hoping that what I'm hearing from the Board of Supervisors, that the arbitrary talk of no outdoor, period, is just an uneducated statement.
They just don't want to see it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
I don't
what-
want to see outdoors different than there should be no outdoors when you're saying it.
Well, I think that, you know, if it's going to be in a structure like a greenhouse that you can see through, you know, the rules need to be, you can't see it from a public right-of-way or a highway, and possibly even a neighbor's property. You know, if you've got a property the size that you can keep that hidden, great. If not, you might need some sort of structural controls to, you know, it's not just, is it outside of a structure, can it be seen? And the board doesn't want to see it.
Well,
Close their eyes when they drive by.
Well, they were also a little bit worried about cave junction style fencing,
Right.
plastics.
Which is one of the reasons why I think in a structure is better than outside, but you can't see it, because the way to make it not seen is big black fences.
Yeah, well, in
Right.
Cave Junction, for example, you know, there's little control over where it
There's
can be
no
put.
control.
There's no control. There's basically state laws saying you need to put this fencing up, and there's really no setbacks, and so people just throw it up on their personal property and throw up a fence. Well, you know, in the state, from Del Norte County, if we make a setback, that eliminates the need for that fence, right? Because you don't see somebody throwing up a fence when they have stuff, you know, 1,000 feet from the edge of their property line where you can't see it, you know? So-
I don't know if feet, though, is going to protect it. I mean, if you're on the highway, you can easily see 1,000 feet.
You can't tell what it is, though. That's the thing.
I don't know if that's true.
Well,
Well, I mean, it'll look like a cornfield when you're going through.
you can't tell.
Wisconsin or
You can't.
something.
You can't ascertain exactly what it is. You could guess what it is, I suppose.
So the other point is, and we kind of talked about this briefly in the other meeting, was if it's in a greenhouse, I mean, it's plastic. You can't, even though you can see the greenhouse, you can't see what's in it per se. You have no clue what that is in there. I mean, you could be told that that's cannabis in that greenhouse, but you wouldn't really know unless the plastic was not there anymore. And so, you know, I think that there's a different standard for if it's in a greenhouse and the plastic is always on it versus the plastic comes off and there it is, you know, so that, in my opinion.
I mean, if I have a greenhouse, I'm putting them in a greenhouse, keeping the plastic on. It's just better for the plants.
Can you word the
Less
visual?
pollen.
A lot of people take the roofs off sometimes, you know, they're getting big
Yeah.
outside.
Just bigger greenhouse.
How much, you know, how much are we gonna see cultivators wanting to cultivate outside of a structure, you know, in this area?
Not a
At
lot.
this
I mean,
elevation?
truthfully, my personal opinion is if you've got the money to invest into cultivating, you're going to want to put a greenhouse up. Just because pure and simple fact, we're on the North Coast.
Sometimes it's nice to peel that plastic off on a nice day, though.
Yes, it is. I mean, you know, the humidity builds up on the inside sometimes, and to roll the sides up is nice to get some cross ventilation through.
There's nice greenhouses that roll all the way to the peak,
They do.
which are awesome during the day, and
They
then you let
do.
them down. You'll use way less, you know, inputs and fuel trying to cool it and dehumidify and all that.
But a properly placed greenhouse and structure usually does the work for itself.
Right.
I mean,
Can
that's
you-
just my personal opinion is, you know, somebody who would choose to be in a greenhouse versus completely outside and in the elements.
Joel, can you word a visual thing so that so you don't end up with fences? So you say you can't see it, like if there was nothing there, if you had no fence and you had no structure, you can't see it from a public place. You know what I mean? So that you can't put something there, like as if there was nothing blocking the line of sight. I don't know. Does that make sense, that question?
No, I don't understand.
Well, like,
Do you mean like if trees were in the way rather than a fence, or use,
Yeah, you can include that, or just it's situated in such a way that it can't be seen, period, from a public road. It doesn't require a man-made anything to block the view. Does that make sense? Like, so that way you don't end up people building fences in order to meet the requirement of not being seen from a road. It just naturally meets that requirement. Maybe there's an existing building that's in the way, or it's, I don't know, something like that. That's what I'm thinking. Like a permanent structure that's in the way, you can't see it, or just the way the topography of the land is, it can't be seen.
I think we can do something like that for not being seen from a public right-of-way.
Okay.
It can't be visible from a public right-of-way, and the reason it's not visible is not because there's a big fence. We can work some language out like that.
Okay.
Then there needs to be setbacks or some kind of protection for a neighbor.
Sure.
Because that won't work for a neighbor. You'll just never,
Sure.
And so if it's, what were we talking about with indoor? Just using the animal setbacks and 100 feet from residential?
Mm-hmm.
I think if it's going to be visible in a greenhouse or something, maybe that should be 100 feet too.
Okay, now if we're talking about ag land, which is something the board is kind of reluctant to see, relatively uncontrolled cultivate. Even if it's in a greenhouse, it's not in a structure where you can mitigate everything. The board's not really comfortable with that. That may be a stretch to even be going there. So maybe we should, if we are going to make that recommendation, which I think there are places, there are ag lands where it's appropriate to have open air growing or greenhouse, light greenhouse structure growing. But I think that we're going to need to talk about huge setbacks from residential areas, like a mile, or like 2,000 feet from a residential zone. And then maybe an additional larger setback from a neighboring ag property, if that's appropriate. But at least I'd like to start by talking about residential areas, zones, whatever, in relation to this, sort of outdoor growing and ag land, because that's the only way it's going to be palatable is if there's just a really big setback. That's what the problems are coming from that we've heard here with ag land. So
if it's 2,000 feet from a residential zone property line and 1,000 from a neighbor, is that going to be workable?
On a big piece of property, I think so. I don't know much about the layout of the big ag lands here, but
I don't think that would have helped on the church tree issue that came before us.
really?
And I-
They're like
so.
really, they're only 100 feet from houses.
But,
But that piece of property
I mean, as
is-
far as being, how many feet did you say that they would have to be from a residential
2,000
use?
feet, that whole
Yeah, 'cause
property.
I mean, you have National Parkway, you have, I don't know. It-
Yeah, well,
Well, that would pretty much eliminate that property.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
not
it
being
would.
visual.
So that would help that
That's the thing.
situation.
Yeah, okay.
That's what
I
that's
see
why
what
I'm
you're
trying to
saying.
say.
Okay, right, it helped the neighborhood,
Gotcha.
not the person who wants to grow.
Oh, yeah, no, it would,
I understand.
it would totally,
We're talking the
it would-
same thing. but
it would-
different.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, protection for the residential areas, I think that's the deal. We decided that indoor, in a really nice structure, you can mitigate these things. You can get closer because you're not, creating a nuisance. But, if you're in a greenhouse, even if it's enclosed, you're ventilating openly, or you can see it. You can see the plants. From 500 feet away, you can definitely see. You can tell the difference between tomatoes and cannabis.
So
1,000 feet gets a little blurrier.
Go back to odor control for greenhouses on ag land.
Right, that's what I'm thinking 2,000, because I can smell them
Is
pretty.
2,000 even enough?
Yeah. On a warm day, like 500 feet, I can smell like a 2,500 square foot stinky grow. I can smell it pretty good from 500 feet. As I approach from 1,000 feet, it depends on the wind and the heat and all of that. 2,000 feet's a stretch. You know, a trained nose might be able to catch a whiff here and there, but I think 2,000 probably would be appropriate. But maybe it's a mile.
Is there any kind of like agglomeration problem if there's not just one 5,000 foot greenhouse, but Smith River is now full of 5,000 foot greenhouse grows?
Yeah, you drive out.
2,000 feet gonna save you?
Yeah, you drive out like, you know, Island Mountain, you know, or Petrolia, and you smell it on your whole tour.
Well, ultimately, one of the things that you're putting into your ordinance at the moment is that you're not allowing new structures in the coastal zone, right? And so, not knowing specifically where the coastal zone is, a greenhouse is classified as a structure. So there is going to be issues with trying to put up a bunch of these in the Smith River, for example, you know.
I guess that depends on, so another thing that the board wanted was caps.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we can't come up with a natural limit the way the setbacks did with retail, how are we going to limit the number of these?
I think being small, it's not going to be super inviting. And every day that goes by, people are getting less and less excited to invest a lot of money into the business. And so it's already seeing a lot of discouragement just because of the hurdles are so high and the process is pretty difficult, especially for your average farmer. The bureaucratic paperwork process with the states, it's pretty intense. It costs, you know, you have to have like a team to do it. You can't do it yourself and be a farmer, really. So it's not like just filling out an application and going to work, you know.
Even for the 500 square foot?
It's the same stack of paperwork and everything for no matter the size, but no, I'm thinking more to outside, you know, inside. Maybe I should say it again. I don't like indoor cultivation. I don't think it should be focused on for production. But
well, we can come back to the issue of caps, but you know, what brought it up for me was, is using existing structures going to create some natural limits, or are there a lot of existing structures that's not going to?
Are we talking about all of it, indoor and outdoor?
Well, all of it, yeah, but specifically greenhouses.
Yeah.
Are there existing greenhouses that can obey these setbacks in the coastal zone? They're so plentiful and available.
No, I don't think so. 2,500, like, when you go to places where there's a lot of growing and you smell it on the road, I mean, these are big grow. People aren't 20, they're not 25. These are areas where people consider a 10,000 square foot grow to be not even profitable. So they don't even want to start unless they can go 20 or 40,000 square feet, you know, by stacking licenses. It's very common. So these are like, you know, dozens and dozens of half-acre canopies. So that's quite a bit different. I don't know any place where it's like what we're talking about, where you only have, you know, a 2,500 square foot garden here or there with huge setbacks like this. So I would just be speculating based on my experience with one 2,500 square foot garden and another one that's about a half a mile away, you know. That's kind of my experience. But.
I think that part of it is having an ordinance that actually protects the community from the things the community is concerned about. But at least as important is having an ordinance that you can point to the provision and say, this is how it's going to protect you. And when you say market forces, people get all nervous.
Sure.
Right? Setbacks, actual hard caps,
Sure.
they can see a number. And so we don't have to settle that now. We should come back to it, but, you know, when they say how many of these are going to be, with retail manufacturing, we can honestly say there's not that much room. It's going to be 3 or 4. Can we say it's going to be 30,
Yeah,
27? Yeah, I don't know.
I think you probably could. I don't like the idea of caps because I think it creates nervousness and it gets people trying to rush in to fill the, you know, to secure the available permits or whatever, you know, but there's less of that happening now. And so I think you probably could come up with a number and you may not even get that number of applications, you know. So I think that how difficult it is. You know, if you said, I mean, I'd like to separate this out between ag and timberland,
Yeah,
but if we're talking about ag land only, you know, if you capped it at 30 permits, you know, I'd be really surprised, pleasantly surprised, if there was 30 applications in the first year in
ag
the
land.
ag area. That would be a lot.
So
you
Joel,
know.
was the Board of Supervisors more concerned with that cap for the ag type land, which is more visible, or was it just a generalized countywide concern?
It's mostly outdoor, I think.
I would guess that I mean, nothing was said at the board meeting specific enough for me to know exactly, but based on kind of the history of the board's feelings, I would say that it's probably countywide. It applies to indoor and outdoor the same. We're talking about overall cultivation operations should be capped.
Okay.
And 30 sounds like a nice number to me. I don't know what that'll sound like to other people.
Are you talking outdoor, indoor, total
I'm talking total.
cap of 30 growers?
I don't think that, I mean, I would hope.
I was
to
talking
get
about
more than
outdoor.
that.
I think if you went to the board and said, you know, we're going to cap it at 50, I don't know what the reaction will be.
If we're gonna have to put recommend a cap, I'd like to say maybe we'd recommend it to sunset in 12 months. We've seen a lot of momentum with the changing attitudes. You know, I don't believe we have a cap on the manufacturing, and I think especially on the 500 square foot scale, I really don't think the cap's even going to come into play, even if we made a cap. But you know, my personal perspective is this is something, you know, that
Try to
could,
revisit it later.
help economic development. But if we got to put a cap, I'd like to maybe suggest that it would just be for 12 months and have it sunset kind of automatically.
What we could do is kind of like where the tax has a range and the board sets it by resolution. We could have an ordinance that says annually the board will set the cap by resolution. I don't know if you like that flexibility or not, because the board could, you know, right? You know,
I think that's appropriate, really, especially in the beginning, because it's hard to know, you know, and it's so difficult to predict. And so I think you could put a cap on it, and then they can, if you're getting a lot of really high-quality applicants that makes sense, then, you know, then you come back and revisit it, you know.
I think we all have to remember that we're looking at the board to make these decisions, and they're not quite educated in some of them as far as indoor, outdoor numbers. Because if you're talking 30, which was something that you liked, Joel, I think you're going to have 30 indoors at 500 very easily, because they're
I think that's right, yeah.
you know, and then you're going to have some people that want to demonstrate or try the outdoor, which there already are people doing that. So, I mean, I think you're looking easily at 100 permits to start when you separate it toward 500 square feet indoor, 5,000 square foot, and outdoor.
okay, I think that it might be one of those things where you go in there in the board and you say 100 permits. It might be like a little bit of a shock, and then you have to see where things land. Because 100 sounds like probably more than, I'm just guessing, probably more than they're thinking you're going to come forward with.
Well, they're also going to make their ultimate decision, whatever we say.
Yeah.
And right now, they're all thinking nothing outdoor. I mean, the only one that said anything about outdoor was Chris. And Chris said that he was going to do what his constituents wanted in his district. And all the other four are pretty much no ag, no visual, no outdoor.
So I think, I'm not sure exactly how many applicants Humboldt has, but I do believe that Trinity.
They're in
which
the
is-
thousands, so
Yeah,
like 3,000.
Humboldt's in thousands. I believe Trinity, which is kind of the same generalized population zone as we have here in Delmar County, they have like 350. They've had a lot less than they had expected, but still 350. And that's total. That's cultivation, you know, retail, manufacturing, everything all combined.
The grow culture there is like a whole order of magnitude beyond this county, though, so it's.
But it just gives us a generalized idea. I mean, we've got Humboldt that's got
Right.
thousands of applicants. We have
Yeah.
Trinity that has, under 1,000
If
applicants.
Trinity has
Do you
350, I
think that the
35.
Humboldt having thousands of applicants has something to do with the enforcement? Because Humboldt is actively shutting people down if they haven't started the application process?
It's because there's already so many there. There's already like
Yeah.
10 or 15,000.
Yeah, but so you're
there
you're
already.
there and you're getting threatened with, we're coming for you if you don't get an application in. And so this is a question for our sheriff. I see him here today. This law is really, in my opinion, the way that we fight the war on drugs. People want to say that, this is going to allow cannabis into our community. Cannabis is in our community. I mean, children buy it on the black market every day, every minute. And to take it off the black market and put it in a regulated market, this is how we, as a community, stop the black market sale of cannabis to our children. And so I'm wondering, if we don't allow these growers to get into this market and they continue in the black market, have we as a county even talked with other counties to come up with how we are going to enforce trying to shut down the black market next year? I mean, is that even a thought yet? Because if we're only going to have 30 permits, there's still going to be tons of people operating illegally. And if we have no thought as to how we're going to combat that, then it doesn't behoove anybody to go get a permit.
Even if you can get a permit, it's going to take people a lot of time to be able to develop the infrastructure it takes, develop a plan, secure funding. It could take years from the time that you even have a framework to work with to the time that you can actually get to work. That can take a long time.
Well, I guess one of the questions would be to Jesse or Eric is, how many growers do you know right now in Delaware County that are black market because there is no permit?
There's
There's a handful.
the thing is, there's not very many who are.
There's over 30.
Yeah,
Yes.
but it's like the trajectory here for hopefulness for permits has been so low that there aren't very many people who have really considered, wanting to go through the hoops to do it. They're like, it's daunting at the idea of getting a permit for a
But they're going to still be
house.
black.
Well, I don't know. It depends, so. Uh-oh.
It's good to see you again, Sheriff Apperson.
Folks, I think I heard a question in there. So yeah, there's a constant effort, but I don't want to skew, and I've seen this, we're trying to put too many components of this into one bowl. Maybe that's a poor choice of words. But I don't think, regardless of how many, black market versus legal grows and dispensaries there are, selling pot to kids is still going to be black market pot. There's never going to be, in other words, I don't think the decisions you're making here are really going to impact that one way or the other. We're talking about selling marijuana to adults. Any kids buying marijuana is going to be an illegal sale, no matter how many legal dispensaries there are or aren't. So I don't want to put that in the same category. That's a separate issue. To me, that's kids buying any drugs, kids buying any tobacco, kids buying any alcohol.
I guess to me, where that comes from is I am not a cannabis grower, but let's pretend for a minute I am. My only avenue right now to sell my product is through the black market, and I sell it to that guy, and that guy. I don't know what they do with it. You have no control over what they do with it because you don't even know who they are. But if I have a permit because I'm trying to conduct myself as a business, I'm forced to sell it to someone that you regulate as a county, and you know that that person is not selling it to a child because you know exactly where that stream goes. Now, when someone walks into the shop and buys a big amount of cannabis, they could walk around and sell it on the street, I guess. But the initial control of where I'm growing it and where I'm sending it is completely regulated, and it's not going to a child because you're regulating that. but without a permit, I'm still growing it, and I'm selling it to somebody, and you have no idea who it is. That's what I'm pointing out.
I totally see your point. I just think it bears mentioning that the folks that are willing to sell weed to kids aren't the people we're talking about.
Totally.
No.
Right, so that's a whole separate target. I get what you're saying, but even if you sell that marijuana to somebody, that in this kind of hypothetical situation we're talking about, you as an adult and a rule follower and a business operator sell it to somebody that's legally able to purchase that, who knows what that person does after that, and if they're turning around and selling it to kids. It's just a totally separate issue. It's targeting the kids, it's an educational piece, it's trying to help those kids make better choices. We recently received sort of a competitive grant through a state initiative to target youth, using tobacco. And it's a grant I'm excited about. It's 2 years long with a decent amount of money attached to it. And it's interesting that the focus on that isn't as heavily supported targeting the individuals that are selling it to the kids, as much as it's more targeting the kids making the choice to participate. And I think it's the same model that would be successful here. So as we talk about doing things legal, doing them the right way, coming up with some sort of idea that, we hope is going to work well, I really don't think any part of that is going to affect it getting into kids' possession. That's, kids haven't been able to buy alcohol in how long? And there was plenty of alcohol when I was going to school, and continues to be alcohol there now. So it's definitely a separate prong, but I respect what you're saying. I think if more people are doing it the right way, holistically, it's going to have a more positive impact on our community for sure. But I really don't think it's going to stop those people that are willing to sell weed to kids from selling weed to kids.
Yeah, I agree.
I just think that also, and maybe this has nothing to do with the sheriff department, but there continues to be an excessive amount of talk about just not allowing this at all in our community.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be from the Board of Supervisors, or the Planning Commission, or anybody else that wants to step up and say that. And so, from my perspective, what I first mentioned was that I believe this is a tool to fight the war on drugs with children, in my opinion. And, if we go down the route as a community of we're just not going to allow this, period, then I think the county departments, all you departments need to be thinking really closely, well, how then am I going to use this tool next year against that, because have we talked to other counties who are not allowing any of this growing? What are they going to do next year trying to shut down non-permitted grows? There seems to be a lot of legal maybe hurdles that might be involved when you walk onto somebody's property on January 1st and say, get rid of all of this, So, that could be something to think about from the legal perspective on the county side if we're not going to go the route of, alleviating the permanent ban.
Yeah, and you're narrowing it down. That's really the scope of what we're talking about. We're talking about one of two options. Do we completely prohibit it, or do we allow it and attempt to control it? And that's the discussion. This discussion continues to get elongated because and I'm trying to be as diplomatic as possible, but when we get everybody's opinion involved, it makes the conversation a much longer one. And, at some point, something has to be presented and a decision has to be made. I want to be clear. I think everybody participating in this is doing a great job. You're facilitating the discussion. I don't want to see this discussion stop. I'm invested in this community. I was born here. I grew up here. I'm raising my children here. I think it's a discussion that has to happen. I think simply cutting off the discussion because you may not like the direction it's going isn't great. I think that's an opportunity for you to participate more in the discussion. But at some point, we need to present something. And people either need to give it that approval or not. So I commend you for what you're doing. I hope you keep it up, and I hope this ends with some sort of product that our community can make a decision on, and then I react to it. I intentionally don't get in the weeds. Another good choice of words, right? I intentionally don't take a position on decisions that are so polarized like this, that people are so passionate about. My job is to enforce the laws, and whatever comes out of this, that's where I'll be. But I like that the discussion's happening. So keep having that discussion, keep staying on a track, and give us something to make a decision on. Anything else, I'm available.
Thanks for everything. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, let's see.
So getting back to setbacks.
Yeah, that's what I'm
and
thinking.
Ag land stuff. I mean, we're still stuck on ag land setbacks and.
Yeah, residential zone setbacks. Any public comment on this?
From the two people who are always here.
We get saved by some public comment here.
So setbacks, ag land, existing structures, I mean, again, if we're talking about the coastal zone,
Oh, caps too.
if you're talking about the coastal zone and you're talking about existing structures, and then it really just comes down to the setback, and you'll be so, you could be so naturally limiting that it doesn't even warrant even talking about a cap, right? Because we've talked about 1,000-foot setback possibly from a road, right? And I don't know where we kind of thought about a setback from an existing property line or from an existing residential, zoned property. But, you start talking in the thousands of feet from a lot of these locations and existing structures, and I would be hard pressed for you to find one structure that would be thousands of feet or 1,000 feet from multiple different points that we're talking about.
I would agree with
1,000
that.
foot is all of a sudden a 20-acre ag parcel is you'd have to have multiple 20-acre ag parcels in between you and whatever zone you're talking about.
And the reasoning behind that is that, I mean, most of these, if we're talking coastal zones here, most of those buildings were built to specific setbacks already if they're existing. They were built as a livestock shed, so they were probably 50 feet from a property line. So, I mean,
And then I guess it boils down to what property are you
like
mining?
who back in the day on their ag land built 1,000 foot from their property line? I'm with Kurt. I can't think of many buildings that I know of in the ag zones and the coastal zones that actually fit that. So,
Different issue, definitely, like in an ag area, neighbor property lines, it's a completely different thing than residential zones. Bigger numbers for sure for residential zones.
I like the thought you had, Jesse, of if it was naturally limiting the visibility to it, like whether it be there's an existing structure in the way, or whether it be trees or the topography of the land. If that was already existing, then you would have less of a setback. If you're just completely visible for a mile, let's say, all around, then you're gonna have a different setback.
Mm-hmm.
And every one of these are gonna have to go through the planning commission. So maybe more, we should be talking about, questions they would ask of the applicant. Is your greenhouse going to be ventilated at any time during your growing season? Things like that, to where they can make a decision within some parameters. If we've got the basic setback, I'm sure the planning commission's going to be vetting these pretty hard.
I'd like to come up with some solid big giant number though from residential zones, so that the planning commission doesn't have to make a mistake and the board doesn't have to make a mistake.
Well,
So we're talking about odor basically at this point.
Yeah.
And I think that 1,000 feet is what it takes to not smell a 2,500 square foot grow. If we're talking about much larger ones, or a whole bunch of those really close to each other, maybe more, but, and then we're talking about caps. I think we could talk about that separately. Indoor, 500 and 5,000, those are different. I don't want to see a lot of 5,000 square foot indoor operations here. Just principally, I think that indoor cultivation is just a bad use of resources, but it could generate a lot of jobs in construction. That's good industry, so I don't want to say no to that either, but
So the
caps on that should be different. On a 500 square foot, you should kind of let the market do that, not try to cap that too aggressively. It would be wonderful. There's so few of them, I think. I don't know if this data is accurate, but I read somewhere there's less than 20 of those licenses issued across the entire state. So if we're worried about getting more than 30 here right in our county, we'd already be, that'd be amazing, but I think the reason why people are ignoring that is because localities haven't focused on it, and the business considers it not to be a viable investment. It's something individuals do, and so far individuals don't feel like it's even worth it to get into the legal market because of the way things are. So it's really hard to say. And people may see this area and say, wow, that's a great place to set up a small operation, and we might get 30 all of a sudden and have twice as many permits here than there are across the rest of the state. Or we may only get 1 or 2 people who think, oh, it's actually worth going through the hoops, exposing, where I am and who I am to all of this, and, spending a lot of money on a relatively small operation, so you may only, it's really hard to say how people are going to calculate whether or not it's worth it to get into the business or to legitimize a business they're already running or whatever. So it's really a tough calculation, but the larger grows, a 5,000 square foot, I think might be more appropriate to actually come up with a cap, say like 10 of those countywide or something, but I don't know. And then outdoor, separate cap discussion, I think.
So going back to setbacks, we had discussed a setback for those indoor from residential areas. I think it was 100, it might have been 200. 200. And then whatever the livestock building setback was for the 550 feet or something like that. To then go to the outdoor, or including an unventilated structure, 1,000 feet from a residential property line, and what?
If we're talking about if we're talking about stopping at 2,500 feet, did we get to that? Is that what we're saying we were going to start for this, or do we want to go a bit larger than that?
Isn't that the lower tier?
2,500 is the lower tier.
Yeah,
if we're going to allow just one of those, no stacking of those, because if we're just talking about 2,500 feet, then we could focus on that for setbacks. Changes if it's larger. So we're sort of okay with that, it seems like, to start with, 2,500. That's where I'd like to start. Yeah, I think 1,000 feet, at least.
From a residential.
Residential.
1,000 feet from a residential, zoned property is.
Yeah.
How do we, like, for example, Heidi, a lot of these ag zoned properties, let's say 5 acre or 20 acre, whatever they have, they do have residences on them. And do we have a way to, I mean, obviously there's been a building permit in theory pulled and a house built on it, but, I was thinking, for example, if you had a 20 acre ag parcel, let's say, isn't that like one of the more common sizes on, let's say, Moorhead Road is 20 acre ag?
Yeah, 5 and 20.
5 and
Sure.
20. And so you have a 20 acre ag parcel, and you're meeting the 1,000 foot setback from a residential zone. Clearly you're not maybe meeting a 1,000 foot setback from an actual residence. Is there a way that we can differentiate between properties lines, like say you want to do a 500 foot from a property line, but if the property adjoining you, next to you, that's also ag, has no residence on it, would it be more appropriate if you had a smaller setback, you know, because the property next to you is a completely empty field, and there's a structure on it, on your piece of property, but it doesn't meet, let's say, a 500-foot setback, maybe if we talk that direction towards the property line, or a 100-foot setback, but there's nothing next to you for thousands of feet. You know, but it could be totally different on a piece of property. The next piece of property over, there could be a house right next to the property line, you know, on an ag zone.
So should there be setbacks from neighboring property lines, period, regardless of what's on them? And should those setbacks vary depending upon what's on those neighboring property lines?
We're talking about a neighboring ag
A
parcel.
neighboring ag parcel.
I don't like distinguishing between a house or no house, because somebody still has the right to build the house.
Right.
So I would just do from the property line, regardless of what's on there now, because people have a future interest in the use of that property.
Right. So what
The
do you
reason,
guys
the
think?
reason I say that is because there's a lot, there are houses on some of these ag pieces of property like this that we're discussing, and there are future considerations of houses on some of these ag pieces of property. And, you know, we're talking in the coastal zone and existing structures, a 20-acre ag parcel, and you have a hundreds of foot setback from a property line. I mean, you're probably eliminating, I would guess, every parcel. Just throw it out there.
I've seen ordinances where they have different setbacks depending on the size of your neighbor's parcel. So if your neighbor has a 5-acre parcel, they have a lot less options to build a house on a vacant property. And so maybe there's, you know, you need a different setback consideration, I don't know, if on a 20-acre parcel, but I don't know, I get what you're saying. It negates somebody's right, you know, regardless of the size of their parcel, they have a right to build a house wherever on it, you know, as long as it fits with county code.
So if we're talking about ag land, is it so important to have much of a setback? I mean,
I don't think so.
wouldn't a 50-foot setback be sufficient? Even if you have, you know, the smells, you're in ag land.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's
I
the
mean-
area set aside for farming smells.
I guess it depends if you have.
I don't know if we're there yet,
living
but-
next to you.
Well, I mean, we're requiring a 50-foot setback for an indoor operation. So, you know, we're using the livestock for an enclosed structure,
Which will have filtration.
which will have filtration. So if we use that theory and that equation for an outdoor grow, even if we put it in a greenhouse, you know, there would be requirements for ventilation then. I mean, if we're considering indoor, the necessity for ventilating at 50 feet from a property line, would we not want to have that same consideration for?
Yeah.
Can you ventilate a greenhouse?
Yeah, you can. I mean, it's a
And
lot
You're not
harder.
going to necessarily.
Yeah,
so
You'd
we're
lose
talking
the
about.
option to open and close it, right?
Yeah, we're talking about being able to grow without having to do that. This is sort of what we're talking about. It's the type of grows where you don't have to do that, and what does it take? And so,
So that,
maybe I'll be Blake Alexander here for a second. And
The-
remind everybody, oh, go ahead, sorry, I interrupted you.
the noxiousness of the smell, you know, is relative, right? If it's a residential property, we don't want people to have to smell it at all. But if your neighbor is an agricultural parcel, what's the happy medium where we're not exposing them completely, but we're also
That's kind of where I was coming
Couple
from,
hundred feet at
because
least, a couple hundred feet.
How about 100 feet? I mean, if we're considering a structured indoor grow on ag land, a 50-foot setback, and what if we doubled that for, say, a greenhouse? Because I mean, we are still talking about an ag land, because this is something that I thought you had mentioned earlier, where the Board of Supervisors did not want to see it. And so, does this discussion need to talk about the fact that, you know, in ag land, we're only going to have it in greenhouses, period, in a structure? Or
that's where I think that the setbacks and are all totally different, right? Like if you're talking about completely unenclosed, then there's a totally different setback
Right.
from a completely enclosed.
So I guess
greenhouse.
that question would be something for the Board of Supervisors. I mean, if it is their intent to not necessarily want to see it visually in the ag zone, whether it be ag zone surrounded by all ag properties, then we have to just basically say in ag land. I mean, just to simplify it in my mind, then all ag land, if you're going to grow on ag land, you got to have it in a greenhouse. And then we can just put a setback to the
And then,
greenhouse.
then the question would be is, are they going to be upset about having 10 or 20 greenhouses
Potentially,
built up on
right.
ag property? Unless they're all
Initially,
saying
we're talking about
existing.
coastal zone, and so we're not talking about building anything. That was the kind of the point.
Well, see, the funny thing is, this is
Then
where
you talk about out of the coastal zone.
I
and then
think
you
we're
talk
getting
about
really
forest.
caught up in this coastal zone thing, which, I mean, if I look at it from the perspective of business, there's not going to be a lot of people who are going to want to set up a lot in the coastal zone. And so I feel like we've been wasting a lot of time talking about the coastal zone, intricacies of that, when that's not really where we're going to see, majority of our applicants come from. Maybe the ag zones that aren't in coastal land, coastal zone area, will probably have some more interest in those spots, but anybody who's in the coastal zone, I think, is going to not necessarily want to
I think that
get involved in that.
open growing close to property lines is going to significantly change the aesthetic character of our agricultural lands. I think Blake Alexander might agree with me on that. And he's reminding us, a lot that his original intent of being on the board and opposing cannabis entirely. And he's come a long way, more than anybody. And I think it may be a stretch to say that it's okay, just because you're ag zoned, we're not fully defining it as an ag product. It's not afforded the same rights and protections as other ag operations yet. Right, exactly. So I think we can be sensitive to that. And I think the 100 feet is just that's too close for a property line for open air, relatively
200 feet.
unmitigated
I
cultivation.
mean, we should just keep going up in increments until we find something that works.
Yeah, I think-
'Cause I think this is about the 4th meeting in a row where I think we've gotten stuck on this coastal ag zone and ag property stuff.
Yeah, I'm
and
not
it's
caring about coastal or not. I don't really care about that. I'm just thinking farmland and cows and barbed wire fences and grass and barns and houses, lots of houses and kids and chickens and bicycles and all of this, I grew up in places like that. And, so, 500 feet, I think, I can smell it. That's about where it's not in my face anymore.
I'd already addressed this before, but in ag zones that are in the ancestral land, I know that there are areas that have tributaries and waterways that the tribe has invested literally millions of dollars. And there are some ag zones that you might be referring to there, and those they would not be satisfied by that kind of a setback. They have obviously there are also other concerns in that region, but just to make sure that there might be other places that are ag zone that might have other reasons why they would be delicate outside of being ag zone.
Certainly, yeah, so sensitivities beyond just neighborhood nuisances. Yeah, we haven't talked a lot about environmental impacts in ag zones. We typically think of them as places that are free from that. We're not as impacting of sensitive habitats, but that's obviously not true. Here we have wetlands, and then, so the tribe reminds us, ag lands around sensitive habitat zones around the tribes. So I don't know if that's, if the environmental part's a separate thing, or just the fact that the tribe being a neighbor and that, in that context, a neighboring setback, or if that's just a different discussion entirely, that the tribe as a neighbor being different than
Yeah,
a
it's
private property
it's
holder.
probably 2 different conversations. So like 3 conversations, right? The conversation about whether people have to smell it next to you, conversation about environmentally sensitive habitat, and the conversation about the tribe, really.
Okay,
3 tribes.
okay.
I think the environmental issue, I'm hoping a lot of that gets taken care of between SEQA review, the normal otherwise requirements we were going to have for water quality and fish and wildlife permits and things like that.
Water board permits, they're the
Water board
ones who watch
permits.
it close.
But, that should be something we look at next. And then, obviously, how we're going to incorporate kind of the tribe's wishes. It's kind of something that's hard to think about before I see what the ordinance is going to look like.
Okay,
Once we have the ordinance, then we can figure out, I think, this is the way I like, is then we figure out what are the impacts going to be to the tribe, and what
Okay.
the tribe thinks about those impacts,
Okay.
and what we can do about it.
Once you have the parameters built in, you
Yeah.
can figure that out a little
So
easier.
what do you guys think about 500 feet from any neighboring property line for an outdoor type grow, which means a greenhouse that could possibly be opened at some period of time?
So see, this is part of what I was trying to say to begin with, and that's why I was trying to come to an understanding of if there's any way we have to differentiate, because in my mind, when I see ag lands out there, there's just so many parcels next to each other that are completely empty. There's nothing on any of them. And then sometimes those parcels begin to butt up against other ag parcels or non-residentially zoned parcels that do have some things on them, like a house. And so that's where I was coming out of, how would you, so, you know, if you have 500-foot setback from property line, well, there's 2.5 miles on that other side of my property line and there's nothing. So why am I having to adhere to a 500-foot setback?
But
I
does
have
that-
a structure right here on the end of my property, and there's nothing for a mile that way.
Here, I'll tell you why.
You know.
Because I'm your neighbor, and I like to ride my horse around my ranch. And I
Okay.
don't want to see your damn grow, and I don't want to smell it.
Okay, so let's
I got my
talk,
cowboy hat on.
so let's
and
talk
I don't-
about it at a different angle then. I'm my own neighbor. I own that piece of property next to me. It's a property line.
Sure. Well, then I'd say if it's under contiguous ownership, or it's your own ownership, then that can be written in, maybe, yeah?
I think that's already kind of how we do it, right, Heidi?
Notify
As
yourself.
far as set, okay.
Yeah, if we're doing setbacks or something, it's not usually from, you know, your own property line between two.
It is between your own property line. I mean, if you're trying to get a different outcome, we would require you to merge your lots, which would then alter your overall
Right.
property line.
Can it be
That's
worded?
fair.
No, it isn't. Can
Yeah,
you word
convert
it?
it,
so-
that sounds fair.
Can you word it so that you don't have to do that, so
Well,
that
I
if
guess
you don't have.
we don't know what happens. Tomorrow, you may sell that piece of property to someone else, and then things change. And that's why,
I
by
gotcha.
combining the lots, we would be afforded some protection that way.
Gotcha.
I'm also thinking of an example where, you know, two different people own property right next to each other. They're both wanting to do this same venture on their pieces of property, and they both have to stay so far away from each other.
It's good for bugs.
You know?
They did this in Humboldt, they wanted 1,000 feet, you know, even in the timberlands, and of course it's really difficult because there's all kinds of places where the good part of the land is right near the property line or whatever, so it eliminated a bunch of it. So then they decided that if you got a letter from your neighbor or whatever, you could waive that. And I think those letters started getting expensive to get from your neighbors.
Charge you $5,000.
Right, so.
I'm now 20% partner in your venture.
So they were definitely going around in circles on how to, you know, give a neighbor rights without them then turning around and extorting you over it, you know, or like somebody just building a house, you know,
So,
near your house so that you
so
can't
what was the
do
setback,
it,
so what was the setback you were saying? 500 foot?
500.
So 500 foot essentially eliminates 20-acre ag parcels. Because a
Right.
20-acre square ag parcel is like 1,000
Yeah.
by 1,000.
Yeah.
And so you can't
Well, that's
be,
40. 40 is quarter mile square, so.
you can't be 500 foot from your property line.
That's why I threw out the 200 to 300
Yeah.
foot setback, because, I mean, you know, you have to think about the dimensions of properties and
Well,
the
300
geometry of things. And
Yeah, 300 foot's a football field.
300 foot is a football field.
Well, maybe it should only be on parcels that are over 400 acres.
I don't think they exist here, maybe, I'm not sure, but that was why I'm asking about, you know, setbacks are different based upon what your adjoining, what your neighboring property is. You know, there's these same ag zones, and some of them have houses, and some of them are friggin' 100 of them in a row.
I mean, I think, you know, I mean, my opinion is I would go with Joel on I mean, we're worrying about a nuisance of smell in an ag zone. And there is just the overall intent of ag. And I know that, you know, cannabis as a crop isn't necessarily considered an agricultural product today. But the intent of ag is still the same.
I just think the board's not going to pass it like that. I think the only way you're going to get the board to pass like any kind of outdoor and ag is if you convince them you've got some really solid numbers to protect neighbors who don't want to see it or smell it.
And so 300 feet. And I would just again mention the fact that any business person who knows anything about agricultural products and particularly cannabis isn't going to do an outdoor unstructured grow in any ag land in the coastal zone. They're not. They're
I
going to
think
put it in
we've
a
come to a
greenhouse.
conclusion on how to mitigate it visually, right? In ag lands, visually, it seems like it's pretty simple. They were talking about in a structure in a greenhouse.
Put it in a greenhouse.
You can't see what's in it. So that's pretty well taken care of. And so now we're kind of talking about smell and
Which should be
distance.
mitigated with the agricultural intent of an ag land. I mean, you're going to smell cow shit, you're going to smell, chicken poo, you're going to smell all kinds of different things on it.
That's where I'm thinking like 100 foot from a property line allows 5 and certainly allows 20 acre ag parcels to be used.
Right.
They're already 1,000 feet from a residential zone.
Okay,
There's probably going to be some of these that might abut close, like within hundreds of feet of a residence that are on an adjoining ag parcel, possibly.
But then we could use the closer to your own house than your neighbor's house in that type of
we don't necessarily have houses
Yeah,
on
there won't
these
be
parcels,
houses
though.
There won't be
necessarily,
houses.
though. On your
What we could do is, pick a number, 200 feet, and then have a finding by the planning commission. Instead of the sensitive uses like the retail that was churches and schools, it's on ag land, it's houses. It's not going to have a reasonable, foreseeable negative impact on a neighbor's
At 200 foot.
home.
Dwelling,
Yeah, dwelling.
okay.
And that will give like a soft protection. It's something, it's not dispositive of anything, but it's something.
And then the homeowners still have the opportunity, even on an ag zone. If I'm an owner of this ag zone and then my next door neighbor on the ag zone wants to do cannabis and I just really don't want to see it, I have the opportunity as the homeowner to go to the planning commission and, give my 2 cents and hope that goes my way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
For the most-
guessing by the planning commission the other night, it will go your way.
More than likely, it seems like the way and for sure, but I mean, that's a mechanism that, the community can use. If the planning commission is, placed itself in a position of not wanting to see cannabis or, inherently just against it, then there's your mechanism right there. I mean.
One other thing I don't know if we talked about. Are we talking about this 2,500 square feet in a greenhouse on 5 acres, or are we only talking about on 20?
I think we were only talking about it on 20. Okay.
I thought we were just talking about setbacks. I mean, that's, like, to me, it doesn't matter the parcel size. Like, that's 2 different ways to go about it, right? The setback takes care of what we're talking about regardless of the parcel.
Yeah, you're probably correct there. The setback does take care of the parcel. We talk about 200-foot setback, we're essentially eliminate 5-acre parcels.
Yeah, that's what we did.
Mathematically, it becomes very difficult to put a 2,500 square foot greenhouse, let's say, on a 5-acre ag parcel. I mean, it's almost impossible.
From a staff's perspective, I think as far as having to process these applications, if we're saying most of the A5 aren't going to qualify, if we could just say 5 acre, or, we wouldn't have to spend a lot of time on analyzing things that probably aren't going to work out. It would
Yeah.
just be very clear.
You mean,
It
Heidi,
just
you
eliminates-
wouldn't have to spend time measuring the things
Yeah,
on a 14 acre?
Yeah, I don't want to be doing
But it just
that.
eliminates like a lot of perfectly suitable places. I mean, you could have a 10-acre parcel that's way more suitable than a 20-acre parcel because of
Well,
where.
can you just say parcels that are zoned ag that are more than 5 acres in size? It doesn't matter, it could be zoned A5, but it may be a 10-acre parcel. But if you just say those, because there's also parcels that may be zoned A5 that are non-conforming as far as the size of the parcel.
Yeah,
that
4.49 acres.
were that size whenever our local coastal program was
Okay, so you're saying
implemented.
have a actual lot
So,
size starting
yeah,
point?
not the zoning, but the
Okay.
physical lot size.
That makes
Sure.
sense.
Okay, that's fine as long as we're not starting at 20 is what I'm trying to say.
No, I would just say, but I
Okay.
mean, like the 5, you're just going to be.
Okay, then you don't get like
That
an
makes
acre
perfect
lot where they're going
Well,
through
while
the,
we were speaking, I went and looked at Google Earth, and one of the areas where we have a lot of A5 is along Moorhead. And you could see with the homes, and like you said, the setbacks that you guys were discussing, it really was going to eliminate them. And if you just move it off the table, then we can just move on and get those that are more likely to be successful.
Yeah, if
and
we're
not have
gonna to
conflicts.
do a 200-acre setback, or 200-foot setback, then, I mean, yeah,
Okay.
we should move Ag 5 off the table, because it really doesn't apply anymore.
You're saying move it off the table. I'm saying
Yeah.
that it should start there.
I think we should say in zones, A whatever, I mean, or I'm suggesting if that's what you guys want to
Right.
do, but say that the parcel has to be, I mean, if you're saying a 10-acre parcel, I mean, it may be zoned A5, but if it's 10 acres in size, then you would qualify to apply for the permit.
Right.
But if it was 5 acres or 6 acres, no.
All I'm
Then-
saying it
Then it
should,
wouldn't be,
Right.
I mean, for the scenario that you're such, as far as
Right.
those rare parcels that are going to be,
I think it
above the
should start
minimum.
at 5. It should start at not below that, but it should start at, in the zoning where it's Ag 5 and up, where the parcel is actually 5 acres or higher.
yeah. I think that we're potentially going to be
But with the 200
landing at the planning commission with a number of unhappy
Sure.
neighbors.
But with a 200-foot
Sure.
setback,
I
it's
agree.
a problem to even use a 5-acre parcel.
That's why I was talking about a 500-foot setback, because then we don't have, it's not 5-acre parcels anymore.
I'd like to be able to go to the board and say 20-plus acres. I think more than just the
All right.
setbacks, that mean, like, for the 5,000-foot indoor, we're saying 20-plus acres.
Right.
Why are we allowing outdoor, which has more impacts, to be on smaller?
Because you could have a 10-acre parcel where you could actually achieve a 500-foot setback, where on a 20-acre parcel, you may not even be able to achieve that setback. So that's all I'm saying, is the 20 doesn't necessarily, it sounds good, I get what you're saying from the board perspective.
matters
Again,
a
a
lot.
10-acre parcel would again be very hard to achieve your 500-foot setback, because you're talking about,
Well, you guys are talking about 200-foot setbacks, so.
well, yeah, but you were saying 500.
If you're talking about 200-foot setbacks, then I don't see why you need a 20-acre parcel. That's, I guess, what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
If you're saying 200 feet is good, who cares what's going on the, on the back 40 of your property? It doesn't make any
Well,
difference.
I guess the biggest thing is the boards and their, their perception.
Sure.
They're not going to perceive, huh? Yeah, that's the most common thing.
You get a lot
Makes them
less
feel better,
numbers.
because you're not going to get it on a 2-acre. You're not really going to get it on a 5-acre through that board. So like a 20-acre, like Joel says, maybe.
And the larger the setback you make, the harder it becomes to ever find anything that was ever existing anywhere that you could ever use. It would basically boil down to, we want all new construction. If we're going to make these larger setbacks, is basically aiming everyone into, you have to build something.
Well, 20 is, I mean, that provides a natural number limit as well for density. Public comment.
Yeah, but there's not that many.
Right.
So, what was the recommended setback for the 500 square foot indoor residence?
Well, we're
Just
we're
building
trying-
setbacks, the same as,
Yeah, I think the ag was 50 foot, because this has something to do with the
I thought we were going
livestock.
with just any building setback for the indoor.
Yeah, on ag it was 50, I think.
On ag, it's 50.
Manufacturing, I don't think there
Okay.
is one.
Oh, right, okay. Livestock building's 50 feet. Yeah.
So, I've got parcel map, the only 5-acre agricultural property currently available in the town. And it has a creek running through the backside of it, the creek goes back, and you have to be at least 100 feet away from the creek to build the furthest setback that you can get from that.
So then that's not a suitable property for cannabis.
Right, but that's,
cultivation.
that's the point I'm making, is we go back and forth between all these setbacks and what feels good, and then when you have kind of an understanding of what the county looks like map-wise, because that's how I think as a real estate agent is, I just see borders and maps and all these little squares everywhere. I don't think you're gonna get anybody doing anything.
But that's available to buy. That's not like what's available, period. I mean, there's lots of landowners that own lots of properties that if the market dictated, they may decide to sell it, they may decide to rent it, they may decide to conduct business on it.
True. But there's also the fact that this is a very standard 5-acre lot, and I'm looking at it going, if most of them look this way. I mean,
That one's
they're all-
been for sale for a long
they're all-
time.
But additionally, when we talk about
It's
ag,
Golden Creek, but-
there are ag zones that are ag zone property that's outside the coastal zone, which then allows you to build upon through our ordinance. And you could buy, empty property, build your structure on it,
Yeah.
you know.
And this is empty property outside the coastal zone, and it's currently, as far as I know, from the last 10 years of data that I've got, is one of 4 that have been sold in the last 10 years. So, I mean, that's just something to keep in mind. There are people who already own land that are either for or against and may rent to people or would want to build a structure. It's kind of the same issue that Patty's having of, you're not going to allow me to go underneath the 600 square foot or the 600 foot setback. I'm not going to be able to find a place, therefore can't operate. And I think that not taking that into consideration, or, everybody can feel good about wanting to put it on 20 acres and 5 acres, but when the rubber hits the road, it doesn't really work. And it's not about money. I mean, I got $10 million sitting in a bank account, and if I'm searching around for property and none of them line up with what the ordinance are,
I completely hear what you're saying, and I agree with it, but devil's advocate
what
of
are
that
you
is
gonna
that
do?
you just made the Board of Supervisors feel good about our ordinance,
Right.
Because
That's
you're
the point
basically
I'm
saying,
trying to
well,
make,
it's a
is
natural
just
limit and there's going to be
why-
nothing happening.
Right, then why are we all here and we're all spending all this time doing all these things? Just keep your ban in effect and we'll move on. You know what I mean? It sucks, but that's reality.
I think you would find that if you put something like this in place, the market would change a little bit, and you probably will find some more ag zone properties either coming up for sale or being utilized. Because part of my thing from the beginning was that there are a lot of ag properties that just aren't being utilized at all, particularly outside of the coastal zone. There's lots of ag properties that are just, desolate.
Are a lot of those ag zone properties owned by the same general amounts of people? I mean, that would be, that would,
I don't think so necessarily. I mean,
what's the makeup of the property owners in the ag
one of the
zones?
things that when I drive through, like, let's say Kings Valley Road, I look at a lot of ag zone properties that I don't feel are being, they have a lot of potential, right? And this possibly gives them the ability to do something with that property, because right now a lot of it isn't being done anything with it.
And so what is it within what we've been discussing that is preventing the utilization of those types of properties? I mean, is there any one thing in particular that...
There's nothing to do with them.
It just really doesn't have anything to do with it. I mean,
They're,
we're dealing with minimums, right? I mean, we're trying to find the minimum here through discussion and debate at a community level that we think the Board of Supervisors would be palatable to. I don't know if they'd be palatable to, some of the things that would allow some of those properties to potentially be used, and that's the bigger issue that precludes our discussion here. It's bigger than
It's going to
this.
take time in order to be able to utilize what we have here, but public comment.
Yeah, kind of going into what he said, if there's not really that many ag zones that are even going to be suitable for this type of cultivation, I think maybe some of the focus definitely should be on some of the TPZ zones. I know the board did voice some concerns about the roads and all that, but I do think that maybe that's where this would be better suited to be at, because if there's no real ag zones, for sale or available, or, the people that already currently own it may not want to do anything with it. I don't know who these owners are, but it may limit it or may not become available at all. So perhaps TVZ zones would be a good other alternative for cultivation.
I agree. I have a question about, okay, so we talked about having a parcel size as a minimum, and then we talked about contiguous ownerships of parcels, and then, what happens there, and notifying your own self and having to observe property lines, setbacks from your own property lines. And then Heidi brought up a valid point that you could sell that property tomorrow, and then, then it doesn't apply anymore. Well, so this is kind of maybe a question for you too, Joel. Because this is a use permit thing that doesn't last a long time, can you have a situation where, okay, so right now, today, you own a stack of contiguous parcels. And for the purposes of your use permit that lasts for a year, you don't have to observe the setback from your own property lines. But then it gets reviewed again the next year. So if sometime in that period of time, you've sold the property or whatever, somebody now wants, to build a house or whatever, now we've got different parameters. Could you then, not renew the permit when things change? And so that would allow, because it's such a temporary thing, I would hate to see people forced into merging parcels to give a go at a one-season thing and then have it not work out.
Yeah, could we place a condition in the use permit that if there's a change of ownership on any of the contiguous parcels, that you have to notify the planning division and that we would bring it back to the planning commission
Right.
for some subsequent review?
Or even
Actually,
cancels your permit existing
that-
if the ownership changes,
Yeah,
so you don't have to
that could be.
wait for the whole year.
Yeah, I think that works.
Yeah,
Cool,
Yeah.
good idea.
all right. So 20 acres, I think that's palatable politically. For outdoors, I think that's fine. It really limits the number. I don't think that would work for all of time, but I think that's an excellent place to start.
So
for outdoor.
we've got 1,000 feet from residential zone, 200 from a neighboring property line, in somebody else's ownership, and on a 20-acre parcel. Is that where we're landing here?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like it.
Can you repeat that, Joel, please?
On ag land, for in a structure that is essentially not filtered, 1,000 feet from a residential property line, 200 feet from a neighboring property line not under your own ownership, on a 20-acre parcel.
Great, thank you.
And then so we would say zone 20-acre ag and then not a substandard lot, an actual 20-acre parcel. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, what we would do is specify in the actual zone for 20 acre. That's the only zone it's allowed. And then in the use permit, probably say it actually has to be 20 acres.
What if-
Something like that.
What if the sum total of your properties is, you have to add them up to meet the 20? You
So
know what I'm
you've
saying?
got,
You got a 10 and
you got a bunch of A5s and it adds up to a 20?
They're all con-
Well, not A5 zone, like, so you're in an A20 zoning and for whatever reason, it's, you've got some substandard lots. I don't know how it works, but, could be a combination of fives, or you've got an 18-acre lot and you've got a 5-acre lot, and they're contiguous under the same ownership.
Yeah, I think we could figure that
Follow
out.
the same rules. If that changes, then you don't qualify, you give up your permit.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Heidi, general plan wise, things are divided between being zoned A5 and A20, right? Based on the quality of the ag land, isn't it?
To some extent, especially with the AE zoning, ag exclusive, which is considered to be the prime.
Prime.
Yeah, there are soil studies that we have that our zoning maps are to some extent based on. Some are also based just on existing settlement patterns and, whenever we develop the general plan, you're not going to create 20-acre size lots where you see, a lot of 5-acre existing parcels.
Right.
So that probably doesn't need to be a consideration. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's ag exclusive or, it's just
I mean, if
about
you're
the
saying,
size.
if the lot, yeah, a parcel that is zoned A5, A20, AE, AI, AF, but is a minimum of 25, or what you're saying, or combined. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Perfect. Okay. All right.
Well,
So-
I think that that's probably good for ag land.
And I just wanted to ask
in and out of the coastal.
a quick question that pertains maybe to all of these adjoining parcels. So you have an owner of all of these existing parcels, right, that maybe are contiguous and meet all these criterias, and then so you have an operator that comes in and wants to operate. It's different than the owner. That all still applies then to the permit holder, right? Like, so he's like, for all intents and purposes, renting the property, and so everything else applies to him, right?
Yeah.
All the same
her.
things, yeah.
Him or her.
Yeah, and with the use permit, the owner is still on the hook for the tenant's misdeeds.
Papers from the property owner attesting to your right to occupy and doing what you're doing.
And if we're gonna abate a nuisance, we're gonna assess it against the owner. So, you're on the hook.
Just wondering.
Well, then we have the bond too, which would be issued to the applicant, assuming we have the same type situation with cultivation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know if it so much matters whose credit is put up to get that bond, as long as we're the ones gonna get the money. But yeah, I think we should have a bond.
Definitely,
Yeah, a bigger bond,
yeah.
$100,000. Huge bond.
Huge bond.
James Bond. Okay. Y'all want to talk about timberland for 15 minutes before we wrap
So
it
we're
up?
gonna, real quickly, we'll go back to potentially capping. Is that still
right.
in discussion at some
Capping.
point? Just after we get through everything, we should come back to caps?
Yeah, so let's see what we can do on timberland.
Okay.
And then I do think that the cap needs to have some consideration of the overall production in the county. If it's separate caps in different areas or different caps, whatever, but I
Like a
think
total square footage?
I was gonna say, I know
Yeah.
there's some counties that are using that calculation
I
to
think that would be.
justify caps. It's an overall square footage of canopy coverage for
The state
the
further
county.
divides up, this is probably more for timberland, but they divide it up by watershed, and they keep track of the density
in
in
each watershed. yeah.
watersheds that are defined by the water board, and they won't go past a certain density.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the calculation, although the water board permit isn't tied to state permits at this point. It's like a separate entity. So like this, the water board doesn't care whether or not you're legal. They just, they want your money if you're growing cannabis.
But you do have to have a water board certificate in order to get a permit.
Right, and those water board certificates are designed by estuaries or by...
Yeah, they are
Yeah,
also.
yes.
and
They're all
also-
specific to whatever watershed you're pulling your
Yeah.
cultivation permit from.
Yeah.
You have to give your track number or whatever, the waterway track number.
Right, so like the water board has their own metrics for that, and then the state also has like another layer of density that's their own information that's like separate from the water board's own policy. I don't know how all the separation of government works there, but,
Well, I mean, that also puts somewhat of a cap.
yeah, it does. Although it's probably a lot larger number than what would be palatable to the board here, probably actually. Just because we're talking about small, like a small size of a grow, you could have a lot of those supported by a watershed. And it might end up being a larger number than is palatable to the board. You know, like 125 square foot grows is a small amount of square footage. It's a small amount of water compared to what you're seeing in other big counties where you're talking about hundreds of farms that are like an acre each, you know, so. But setbacks in timberland, I'm thinking like there's residential areas, when I think about South Fork, and that's like a lot of PO zoning, but it's residential also. So those kinds of places where it's a developed neighborhood timberland, I don't know if those are, how the designation goes, if we can call those residential areas, underlying land use as residential. I'm thinking about like out South Fork area where there's a lot of development, and I think some of the zoning is still PO out there, maybe some TPZ, although the land use is residential now because of the
You said on South Fork?
Out South Fork, there's a few
Yeah.
community out at the very end, Big Flat, and
Big
then
Flat, yeah. The Big
halfway.
Flat, I believe the land use we changed the land use from what would have been old forestry to a rural residential, I believe 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres, and then
Right.
also to an agricultural land use.
Right.
Yep.
So the ag things we talk about could apply there theoretically, our numbers. And then, but timberland that's adjacent to residential areas, that's what I'm thinking about, where you could have, you know, really large setbacks to make everybody comfortable, you know, like, there's
Well,
not very many suitable,
On your timberlands, it's just the PO and the TPZ.
for the most part. I think there's not a lot of that. That's gonna be in the ag lands anyway, and then there's the FR, but that's too residential.
Well, you know, I mean, that leads to another discussion, you know, like what we had at the last meeting with the ag forest land and the potential for having to rezone. But for the, you know, sake of just talking about setbacks, it'd be TPZ and PO.
So I'm thinking big, like, you know, like 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet.
For residential,
yeah, like-
residentially zoned property.
Right, kind of like what we were talking about with the ag. And that, that would be fine. Most of the places that I seen on the maps that are suitable, you know, have a mile or more from.
Well, let me double check my map and see if I have
Sure.
any residential zones. Hold on.
And then I'd also like to, so that makes sense to everybody, something like that would make it easier. And then, for roads, I'd like to see it stop at the small scale, 2,500 square foot, 1 permit if you're talking about dirt roads. Maybe bigger if your parcel has access directly to pavement, county pavement or state highway, whatever. Then it's a different impact, then you could go a little bit larger. 2 permits, 5,000 square foot maybe, something like that. Those are kind of the ideas I had. But when we're talking about the dirt roads and the impact, I don't think we should be entertaining more than 1 small scale permit.
Per parcel.
Per parcel or,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of agree with that a little bit, that line of thinking where, you know, we're trying to minimize the impact on the undeveloped roadways, you know, forestry roads and stuff like that. And I do like the potential for, you know, a property that basically just has access to a county road, you know, having the capabilities for that. Because most of those properties are going to be on grid power. And so the capabilities for them having infrastructure is better than, you know, say some of these other TPZ lands that are, you know, access through the dirt roads that don't have grid power.
Sure.
So I kind of like that idea. I like that direction.
I think the small scale, you know, and the per parcel and off of county maintained, you know, unimproved essentially roads, I guess is how I would describe them, then that probably mitigates a lot of the concerns that I think should be had on the viability of those roads. You know, that's not substantially increasing any amount of traffic that was already existing on those roads to date. If anything, it may be just helping that situation. And then we're probably getting to the point where we're going to be talking about limiting like permits, right? And so there's going to be no real significant impact, if that's the case, on any of these county unimproved roads when you're talking about a limited number of permits and they're all small scaled on these unimproved roads. So that probably, in my mind, mitigates the road issue.
I'm not sure how you limit the permits easily. Like, again, I don't think we're going to get a whole lot of applicants that are going to be able to meet all the qualifications of everything that it takes. It's just like there's a lot of property development that goes into it. So, but
I
you
guess
can't
it's
just say that to the board. You can just say, oh, we're probably not going to get many applicants. You know, you
Yeah.
got to put a cap on it. So, I mean, I doubt you're going to get more than 10 even in the first year. So, I mean, if you capped it at 20 or 50, I really don't think anybody's going to bump up against that cap in the first year anyway.
Well, let's hope they do, because, I mean,
let's
you
hope
know,
they
with
do.
with the
Right.
permit fees, the county could be seeing, you know,
Sure.
a substantial
I
amount of
hope
money.
we
If
get
we
one
get 50
permit
applicants.
applicant.
It'd be great.
One applicant would be good. And then visibility in timberland. Okay, this is like recreational. People go there, you know, they don't go there to see pot farms in the woods necessarily. You go there for recreation. So what about visibility from public spaces? I think it shouldn't be visible from a county road or from public lands. A lot of these places are adjacent to public lands.
Yeah, so I think definitely you don't want it visible from a county road. I think that right there would be an issue with Board of Supervisors or with, you know, anybody against cannabis, right? Oh, we can see it from a county road. That's no good. We need to find a way to get around that. And so that boils back down to what you were saying about how do we do that? Is it just straight, is it just like really large, like, do we get back to the 1,000-foot setback? Isn't that what we talked about with the ag stuff, like the 1,000?
Not from public, I think we just said you can't see it.
Can't see it,
And,
yeah.
and we're gonna try to define it as, you can't be using a fence to make it so you can't see it.
So say if you had like a 100-foot wide berth of trees from the county road, and I'm just going to use my property as an example. It follows the county road, Highway 199, but there's about 100-foot thick berth of trees from the county road down the side of the hill to our farmland. You can't see it from the highway. Now, if you're walking down the road and you're hitchhiking down the road and you stop and you try to peer through, you know, 10 sets of trees, you might be able to see a few spots. How do we make that palatable? What is the definition of sight from a county road? I mean, is that I'm driving 65 miles an hour down the road and, you know, it's whizzing right by me, or I'm meandering on my feet?
Yeah, can you do that, Joel? Can you make that distinction? Like, how well can you see? How hard do you have to look?
That's definitely going to be an issue, I think.
And there's the unaided vision thing, you know, with unaided vision, but...
Like Fourth Amendment?
Fourth Amendment?
The unaided vision, it's not a legal search if, never mind.
I understood what you were saying.
I don't know. I don't know what we'll do with that.
I don't know, it's kind of like splitting hairs.
Yeah.
Again, it is. I mean, that's, you know.
I think if it's got trees there, it's got trees there, and it's stopping your vision. I mean, if somebody's getting out a monocular or a pair of binoculars.
And appearing to my private property, then that's another story, you know, I mean.
Leave it up to the planning department, whoever's out there inspecting the project, right?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because I think if you don't incorporate some type of unaided, you know, vision, or visually you can't see it, then you really have to boil it back down to setbacks from county roads. Because we've kind of mitigated that problem on ag lands because we're talking about it being in a greenhouse, right? So that mitigates it there, but otherwise then...
There should be a number maybe.
Because otherwise maybe you're talking about different numbers depending on what kind of road it is, right? Because if it's a paved road...
But setback from public spaces,
you know,
so that would cover like
Forest
national
Road
forest.
25154, you know what I mean?
Right, so you got national forest, maybe should be a setback from that on the county road, so just one setback for public spaces that not your property has to be from, but that your operation needs to be from. You know, so what, 100 feet, 200 feet?
Yeah, there should be some setback.
There should be a
But
hard number.
if you just said not visible from a public space, basically like the Six Plants ordinance.
Right.
How about like not visible from a public space with a minimum of 100-foot setback from a county road?
Yeah, I think that would work.
I mean, at least what that does is that gives the Board of Supervisors a hard number. You know, I mean, we could increase that number if we felt necessary.
That's almost too close for open air growing if we're
You would,
talking about
yeah,
smell.
exactly. I just
We
threw it
would
out there as
smell
an, you know, an option like here. I mean, if we're gonna, if the board is happy with hard numbers, you know, we could incorporate a hard number in there that doesn't limit the capabilities of those properties, but gives them a number.
I think for the odor.
Here again, they're gonna change it to their number. Anyway.
Sure. But we gotta
There's
get
only one person that even wants outdoor.
Right. It is what I'm
gotta beat up 4 to get outdoor anyway.
What I'm worried about is that if they can come around on outdoor if you don't ask for too much. If you ask for too much, they're just gonna say no to it all.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way the thinking is. They're not gonna split hairs and offer you a solution that works. They're just gonna, you know what I mean?
I know what you mean, but going to that meeting yesterday, to me, it's gonna seem like the planning commission. They're gonna say they don't have enough information.
Sure.
No matter how much we sit here and argue over things and try to give them educated decisions, they're still not going to have that time frame that we have working on it.
Yeah, for sure. And then, and ultimately, that's their problem. Let the people be
No, it's my
unhappy with
problem.
them.
It's my
You know what I mean? They grabbed us, a group of people that knows what we're talking about, and if they want to completely ignore what our suggestions are, then let that be on them. You know what I mean? Like, that's their fallacy and what they're doing.
Sure.
By not listening to the quote-unquote experts. I hate to describe myself as an expert, but, you know, I have a degree in production. I know about these things. I mean, I can give you a lot of...
You're a college man.
We're giving you recommendations. Do with them what you want, and then go from there.
Okay.
You know, setbacks.
Makes us a scapegoat.
We talk. Yeah. Well, I'm fine with being a scapegoat, but
Martyr.
yeah. You know, the unaided vision thing, Joel. The only thing I'm concerned about that, and maybe you can alleviate my concern, is so then somebody throws up an ugly fence to get rid of the vision problem, right? So is that something that we can mitigate with this?
Yeah, I'd have to play with the language, but it wouldn't be the plants you can't see. It would be the, you know, related apparatus. If the fence is there to stop you from seeing the cannabis, then I think we all basically see what you're doing, right? That's the problem everybody has with Oregon.
Yeah.
If we know what's behind that fence, you're not hiding anything.
Well, and that comes through your permit process, right?
Yeah, we'd have to have something about, you know, protection of visual resources and, you know, what exactly it means to not be visible. Something we'll have to do. I don't exactly have that language yet, but yeah.
So what I'm getting, at least in the short term, like in this initial ordinance, I think you know, if you put something in there where you're assuring somebody that, hey, you know, like board supervisor, they can't put up these fences that everyone's concerned about, that alleviates one concern.
Right. And then a hard number. Right. You know, I mean, we've got hard numbers on every other property lines. Right. You know, I think we should probably come up with a hard number from a county road.
I want to wrap it up here pretty quick, but I think that even more from the visibility thing from public space, when we're talking about this, is it's the odor from a public space. And so 100 feet isn't enough, you know, that I almost feel like it should be the same as a residential area. Like in timberland, you know, the public spaces are like, you know, that you should be able to enjoy that like your residential area almost. You know,
so you're saying 1,000 feet?
Public spaces. I don't know.
I wouldn't.
If you're driving down
it wouldn't be doable.
199 with your windows down, you shouldn't be able to smell it.
Right, that's going to be tough because
the board's not going to be happy if it smells like cannabis.
So yeah, we have a real impasse now because there's so many places that are, you know,
Well, that's why I think it's up to us to try to give them direction as to what a hard number would be. I mean, if you're driving 60 miles an hour down 199 and you come through the tunnel, again, I'm going to use my property as an example. You come through the tunnel, you go down the grade towards Oregon, 200-foot setback. I mean, you know, I've had plants on there that have smelled, and you can't smell it from the road. Particularly when you're driving 60 miles an hour down the road. I mean, you know, you've got a lot of different scents that are.
But if you're hiking on a hiking trail, though, in a public space that's near it, you know, now it's different, you know? So it's like, I don't know, if you're riding your mountain bike on a dirt county road like Low Divide, you know? You kind of smell it if it's within 1,000 feet of the road.
Well, let's put it this way. I mean, you know, for all intents and purposes, if you're driving your bike down a Low Divide road and, you know, we've got 15 grows on Low Divide road and there's all 1,000 foot from said road, you're still going to smell it. I mean, I don't know, the mitigation of odor is, again, one of those splitting the hairs thing. I mean, my nose can smell something from a mile away if it's something particular.
I know that area
I'm not as you know, so.
I mean, it does help, though. I mean, I know the area, so the ones that are right by the road, that are 200 feet from the road.
Okay, so, but now we're talking about TPZ lands. If we take that inherent same talk that we're talking about now and overlay that into ag zones, why weren't we talking about smells and sites of 1,000 foot from, say, 101?
Right.
never came up.
Sure.
Why are all of a sudden we're getting into
Exactly.
199 and our TPZ?
Because we forgot to talk
growing?
about that on ag land.
Well, I mean, so, but why did it get brought up now? I mean, those are the things that I start to wonder about. It's like, okay, we didn't at all think about that on 101, but now that we're talking about our prime cultivation zones, that we've all in the county have said, this is where
Yeah.
it could be appropriate, and now we start talking about.
I
well,
can't
we
explain
made
the order of
snow
how
from
things come
199.
up. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't get it. I
Human
don't-
beings, I mean, I think of things in really weird orders.
Sometimes things get brought up that weren't issues before they were brought up.
Because you used your property as an example, that's why.
Exactly, but, I mean, and it's not necessarily, I'm just saying, if we hadn't said 1,000 foot from 101, why are we going to say
Hey,
1,000
look, I'm
foot from
sensitive to it
199?
too. Every place that I know, all my friends, everywhere, they're all within those numbers, so it would exclude it all, so.
Well,
I'm right there
my
with
two
you.
cents, my two
we
cents
can't
would
go
be
to
the-
1,000.
to be mirroring similar setbacks that we've talked about on ag land as appropriate, and putting those into the
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
TPZ
From a
or
residential.
PO, all that type of stuff, yeah. And then, we're talking about visually, and all that stuff is in my opinion, as far as the influence it has on, people of the county and all that stuff, that it's less so in TPZ land.
Absolutely.
And so there's different concerns in TPZ land than ag land, but in my opinion, this isn't one of them.
Okay.
So I would be less concerned with trying to make larger setbacks
For
in
smell
those
and
lands.
vision.
Okay.
If we want to talk about setbacks from, maybe there's other pieces of property, we need to talk about setbacks from like state parks or something like that. Maybe that deserves.
Yeah. Humboldt has
conversations
600
because
feet from state parks.
there's other setbacks that we haven't discussed, like
Sure.
there's setbacks from tribally owned lands that apply, that are more than 100 feet.
Yeah.
So there are other pieces of property than just residential.
Okay, I'd like to go back
We could
just,
define publicly owned land to include land owned by the tribe as it's a government.
sure.
I mean, we can make it really broad and have a definition in there. And if Humboldt's doing 600 feet, our board's going to do at least 600 feet.
600 feet
Right,
is in
it's-
the,
it-
Well, I think the state
Well,
park
that's in
was
the
asking, the
state.
state park was asking for that.
well, that's in the,
Yeah, what is Humboldt? Oh.
Humboldt has changed it in certain places to 1,000, so in 2.0 it was changed. Just so there was pushback on the 600.
Like the issue with the distance from a school, the board doesn't want to go less than state. I think the board's probably not going to be less restrictive than Humboldt either, right? I think that's fairly safe bet if Humboldt's saying 1,000 from a state park.
I don't think that they're gonna know unless you tell them.
Well, I probably will.
It comes up on the plan. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to work on the agenda here a little bit, and then I think what we need to do is go back to our ag land discussion, and we have these setbacks, but we have red zone, property line of other ownership, but we don't have setback from like the county road. If we're going to talk about that as like the 200 feet, that we're calling that a property line of other ownership,
Well, we said
the
200.
county line.
Yeah, 200 feet on the property line of other ownerships. and,
So that would be the county road would fall under that
I
also?
would think so.
I would
Okay.
imagine so.
Okay, so something like that then is probably what we could start with
TPZ.
for TPZ too.
I would think so.
Okay.
I mean, it's a sizable distance. I mean, when you're talking,
I think that's going to come back to kind of a density issue where if all the properties along 199 are growing 2,500 feet, 200 feet from the road, the cumulative smell is going to start bothering people.
All right,
Or
so-
How much
one or two
public
property owners
property-
might not.
All right.
How much public property, I mean, how much public property is really within
there's not a lot.
the 190, I really don't know.
There's a lot of
especially
private
TPZ,
property
a
that's
little-
that's along the road. There's plenty of parcels that are along the road. I mean, not a lot, but there are.
Yeah, but are they growable? I mean, they've got trees and stuff on them, and
Yeah, you're right. I mean, most of them are little, like around Gasky. You gotta go in, like in between Gasky and the tunnel, there's a few.
There's a handful.
Nice parcels,
Yeah.
a couple.
And there's a few
20s.
within the neighborhood area of the opposite north side of
Yeah.
the tunnel. There's a
We'll have
few
to get the
20 acre
maps out to
properties
look
there.
at this again and look at the density, but I think that there isn't enough in order to get a lot of that, but.
Thinking about Gasky, I just want to mention something real quickly because, it's always been on my thought. How do we feel about the scenic national highway area of 199? I know it starts in one point and then it ends right before the tunnel. Are there any concerns the board would have, or we should have, or any considerations we should put into considering that we have a section of 199 and that is a national scenic byway in relationship to having a grow on the highway?
Our general plan designates 199, 101, and 197 as scenic resources to protect.
Right.
So I wouldn't worry about a national designation. You know, those are areas that are sensitive to our planning.
Okay, so are there anything that we haven't talked about, or I mean, from the staff's perspective, that we should, you know, take into consideration for properties that may be within that thoroughfare of scenic byway?
For me, I'm thinking mostly smell and sight.
Okay.
I don't know if Heidi is thinking of another thing.
No.
No, those are the two primary.
Okay.
All right. Do we want to meet next Wednesday? I think we have not scheduled past this point.
I believe I received an invitation to a meeting on the 25th.
Okay.
Did
I
anyone
had scheduled a
else?
few ahead, but I had a hard time remembering.
Too. I thought it was a mistake, actually, but yeah, if you got it too, I'm not sure.
Well,
Yeah.
wait, the 25th wouldn't be the next,
No.
that's not the right date. I don't know.
My 2 cents is that we should
19th is
try to
next Wednesday.
schedule our next meeting with
Let me
Blake
call-
here.
Yes.
Because we
Yeah.
do need to kind of we're going to spend a lot of time rehashing a lot of the stuff we've talked
Right.
about the last 2 meetings and
Does-
then getting that.
And we don't know whether or not Blake.
In
what
theory,
his
he's here next
availability is.
Wednesday,
He
but
said he would be here.
Oh, he did, wait,
next
okay.
He said he'd only going to miss 2 in
theory.
a row.
Let's
Okay.
try it for next
Do
Wednesday
you want me to
then.
double check to make sure we're reserved?
Yeah. And then we can just continue.
I have an invitation from Kylie for the 19th already,
Okay.
so I'm assuming that would be.
I guess
Okay,
that's the one I
I had
got.
scheduled a
Yeah,
few in
I already got
advance,
that
and
too.
I couldn't remember how far forward we went, so.
19th.
Okay, so we'll meet again here Wednesday, the 19th, 10 a.m., and we're just going to continue this discussion, commercial cultivation. I think we probably still have a little more to talk about with the ag land. Does everyone agree with that? We'll just keep it open, just commercial cultivation generally without specifics, unless anyone wants to put anything specific on the agenda.
Well, I think that if Blake's here, he'll have some things to add to the ag land area,
Okay.
and we'll have a chance to discuss it.
need to rehash all this.
Would it be possible, maybe, I don't know what Joel's availability is to work, where we could put together a piece of paper that kind of lays out the premise for all the things that we think that we're kind of in agreement upon and where our question marks are? So maybe whenever we have the conversation with Blake, he'll have something in front of them.
Okay.
I don't know.
I
mean-
could
that'd
make
be
that
helpful.
happen,
Consensus summary?
I think.
I mean, I put together a little spreadsheet with some notes while we were meeting that I can share with Joel, but I think that would help me to kind of soak it
Okay.
all in.
And it would
Certainly.
give us what direction we haven't. hit,
Exactly,
so-
what things have we not,
Right.
are we still looking at?
If Blake can make the time, I'm going to try to meet with him and catch him up a little bit with my notes. Okay. Anything else before we close it up? All right, meeting adjourned.